I'm Jennifer Brown, and on behalf of the Center for Literary Arts at Frostburg State University, I'd like to welcome you to the 15th Annual Western Maryland Independent Literature Festival, and especially to this event with Sally Rosen Kindred. I'd also like to thank the sponsors who make our work possible. They are the Allegheny Arts Council, the City of Frostburg, Savage Mountain Punk Arts, and several offices at Frostburg State University, including the Office of the President, the Office of the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Department of English and Foreign Languages and Literature. Sally Rosen Kindred is the author of the just published Where the Wolf. Her previous books, which is beautiful, by the way, her previous books are Book of Asters and No Eden. Sally's chapbooks include Garnet Lanterns and Darling Hands, Darling Tongue, and Says the Forest to the Girl. She teaches creative writing for the Johns Hopkins University Center for Talented Youth. And she also has a poem in our Center for Literary Arts Poetry Project, which takes arborist stakes and prints poems on them and puts them beside trees in urban locations or other locations around Allegheny County, Maryland. You can find a plaque with Sally's poem The Next Day at the South Cumberland Library in Cumberland, Maryland, and another location will be coming soon. Please join me in welcoming Sally Rosen Kindred.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm so excited to I'm going to say be here. I'm not in Frostburg, but I like to pretend I'm in Frostburg. I love the Indie Lit Festival, and I think I started coming in maybe 2011, 2012, and have just always appreciated what the Center for Literary Arts and Frostburg and the library and all of you are doing. It's always a pleasure to be with your community, which is so warm and thoughtful, and shop at Main Street Books and just talk to everybody. So it's great to be here. Although I do, as I said to you earlier, Jen, do hope we can do it in person in a year. That would be so wonderful. I am going to be reading today, as you said, from Where the Wolf, which is new. It's out from Diode Editions. It came out in June. You may guess from looking at the cover with the wolf and the title, Where the Wolf, that there are some folklore-esque echoes and elements in this collection, and you'd be correct. So we'll just start right there with Let the Wolf at the Door on in. The first poem I'm going to read is called First Night. 2 hours after my father left for good, with his wet hair lamp gleam black and his zippered bag, my mother pulsed through the house, turning off all the lights. I followed her, then sat on the rug in the dark, watching smoke twist up from her cigarette and drop small stars to burn into her blouse, black with blue roses. I did not yet believe in the kitchen to come, in bottles that lit and littered the air, tilting here from the future, that God could lay her down years on that couch. I looked up at her. I touched the rug's braid. Behind her head, 4 cold windows. Beyond them, outside, in grass, moon wet with night, a ghost wolf guarded the yard. In memory, she moves now out from the alders and skirts the silver swings. Her tufts bristle in the grass. We had called her name with a snap of the switch on the glass white globe, turn of the lamp's brass key, with our breath and fingers. Without that dark, wolf could never have found us. She could not have come to me, would not have felt safe. My mother was sagging already, losing stars, buckling under her story. Pain found me wolf's ghost body, gave me never and fur. I dreamed, I hid, I held, I would not tell. So the collection opens with this kind of refusing to tell, and then there's a lot of telling that happens. Otherwise, there would be no book. And it introduces in that first poem, it's the first poem in the book, First Night, introduces both a family and a wolf. And the wolf kindly sticks around for the rest of the book. This wolf and other wolves weave their way through the poems, which are about the family, about this daughter, and about the mother-daughter relationship. But before I get to the family, I wanted to read another poem about the wolf. This particular wolf, there's several in the collection, but this she-wolf becomes kind of a hinge that the poems turn on. So this next poem is called Is She? You think this is a poem where the wolf, the forest, after all, is a sleeve of glass daggers. You, the girl, cold throat, wet shoes. Wolf is the ghost of a hurt, remembering itself. Is she? You can hear her between trees. You can see the ghost her mouth was, weaving wet fur in the shards. If the forest is an altar built in the crack of your lost one's femur, then this is the moment when the girl is you kneeling before it. Wolf says, the scarlet bird is the one with a scar in it. Wolf says, gather stones. Will be the end of the story of the wolf, moving slowly across the sentence you have been speaking since before you were born. You say what a stone says in the pocket of your dress, and forget you were ever a wing. So that poem introduces that wolf, and the next one tells us a little bit more about this family, which in the first part of the book is very much about an adolescent. And I would have to say the collection in general addresses kind of these threshold moments in life, adolescence and middle age. And that's not an accident. I am surrounded by adolescence and middle age right now, being a middle-aged person raising adolescents, which brings my own adolescence back to me, which is, I think, how I got there. But this poem goes back to sort of that adolescent moment and this threshold moment, specifically of crossing a line between mother's space and father's space in a kind of custody arrangement. And it's perfect for today because it's called Dear October. By the soft collar you claimed me, season of early dark, October at my pin curl's end. My father was now a Wednesday night, a Nova in the drive. The sedan pulled up at 6, horn hurtling through the bricks. His headlights fixed mist in the front room glass. And my mother, unwived for weeks, already down in the den, sleeping the dahlias off. Cold month, you turned me 11, purse in hand, buttoned and clasping at the mirror, ready, unready, afraid. Dear stairs, dear ladder of stars, how do I climb down to wet gravel, away from her? Where would I hold my purse? What could I keep inside? There was no prayer for this, no kindness. Dear branch, gusting between porch and windshield rain, whose girl are you? Do you lift your head or bend? Dear October, dear door, by the garnet sleeves you held me, by the braid. So adolescence is hard, and now I've had the experience of coming at it from two directions, from being one and from parenting one. The next two poems that I'm going to read are parenting poems, and while that adolescent poem spoke to very specifically a kind of 1970s moment, there's a Chevy Nova in the drive. And in fact, somebody told me that their favorite character in this book is the Chevy Nova, which I kind of love. This next poem is about adolescence in a much more contemporary setting. And it's also a threshold. It's about watching your child cross the line from inside, from privacy, from the safety of home into a public world. And because it takes place in 2016, 2017, it also speaks to a very specific experience of being a white mother who is adoptive mom to two wonderful Guatemalan teenage sons, and watching them move out into the United States, into the street, into the world in 2016, 2017, when being Guatemalan has this particularly charged meaning. It's parenting's always scary, but this is one brand of scary. And the poem has birds in it just because I love birds. It has kingfishers in it, and the word for a group of kingfishers is a crown of kingfishers. And of course, the crown comes from the root word corona. So it has the word corona in it, but I swear I wrote it in 2016. I had no idea what I was doing. So not prescient, just, like words. Crown. Believe a crown of kingfishers, their spines tuned for ascent, their belted feathers split with blue light that scatters as they loose the tree, a crown, a wound, a consequence of birds whose blue light rattles sky, whose feathers, strung beneath our star, sing to bruising. Believe a curve in the road, the climb of its spine that sings under a boy, standing where an officer's car might come, might shatter blue light into the trees. Believe corona of our sun, belting its flares at twilight, suspended, a gown, a wound, a wish. Believe the crown of my son, soft, unhooded. 15 is a crown cleaving to its own shine. He swings an arm from the shoulder. His hair inks shadows over the moss. He lifts a lighter to the paper birch, beholds a leaf almost to burning. Believe that my son, his skin brown as the sparrow's throat, his collarbone tender as kingfisher's wing, belongs to me, my absent white body. No, belongs to the trees that loosed a crown of birds, a mercy. Believe my son no ornament, no thorn, that he should not be loosed from this place, that he should not need to fly from blue light, a wound, a crown, a circling. Believe the trees will keep close his body, that he might still hold fire in his hand. I'm going to read one more parenting poem. And I was looking at the parenting poems, deciding what to read today, and I realized they're kind of all the same poem. So my apologies for that. But parenting is and remains scary, although this is not a poem about teenagers. So there is that. This is parenting a younger child. And it's a poem I tried to write for a long time, which I'll say a little about after I read it. But it came up, it existed in drafts over several years. So although it's about a 3-year-old, by the time I finally wrote this version of this poem and it was finally done, he was a lot older. Anyway, it's called And Ryegrass and Wind. When we drove by the field where the horse always stood, the chestnut named Loretta, you'd move your small hand to the glass, say, horse. You'd circle your hand in the air to ghost the mall carousel. I'd say, but those horses aren't real. You'd say, nay. And one day, the field had no horse in it. One day, the air was a hole all the nut brown reel had fallen through. That day, you splayed your hand on the glass and said, horse, the way you'd say milk, and there was only thistle and a lip of light. The next day, there was a paper on the fence, some child's crayon paper of a horse, and you made me drive to the fence and climb out and touch the muddy sheet. Or we'd drive and park in front of the raw, unstained grass, our windows up, and watch the brown crayon lick the wet pulp dripping from last night's rain. You'd bring your cup of red juice or a book in the car, and you are 2 arms lifting and spinning. You are nosing the glass, and I am your mother. I am the one who is supposed to save you, my flank, my gamble, my mane, who can never save you, my flesh, my field, my whinny, my clover hair. As I said, I wrote several versions of that poem before it evolved to what it is here. And I was thinking about this today, the first over years. And the first time I wrote this poem, it was on the occasion of that horse's death and this experience. But in the poem, the horse didn't die. It was just like the horse is here, the carousel of horses are there. And I thought, what's not working in this poem? I could say that I didn't kill off the horse in the poem because I didn't want it to be that sentimental. But of course, that's what was not working in the poem, was the horse didn't die. And it's a little interesting to me how it took me so long to figure out how to do that. And yeah, that's all I'll say about that. It's just weird how these poems evolve. I'm just going to read 3 more. And it takes us to the back of the book, the end of the collection. And the book is in 3 parts. And in the 3rd section, there are more poems about being an adult daughter of a mother, the mother who appears in the beginning of the book with the separation, but who is now an aging mother who is experiencing dementia. So fun times. But although there's a lot about that, and it takes us later in a kind of chronology of the family, there's still some time travel. There's a kind of, because that experience of the aging mother mirrors in some ways the experience of the emotionally, the traumatized mother in the beginning. So this next poem, even though it's near the end of the book, is a coda actually to the very first poem that I read, the one where the wolf comes into the yard, and takes place around that time. It's kind of a sequel. And it's called Coda, the Night Glass. When I was 10, she set a glass of wine on the table. My mother knew to praise, and the paints for night, currant, rookwood, garnet, stirred in the drift, shade of a hood. Her thirst unsleeved in parts, a stem first, a mouth. My mother's lips, though, were a blue envelope, a glued wing, a flap, could keep her sleep's secrets. Late at night, the glass would crack. Its whistle split shingles, let the sky inside. She made it. Her fear named the parts. Night sky, a stem. Night sky, a mouth. She could drown a hyacinth. She could thread a wolf through the moon. When I was 10, a glass of wine. Now I howl when it spills over. I stain when it slips through. She'll say, crimson, no invention. Call the red dress my dream. I wake hard, a daughter. I break back into my skin. So I'm just going to read 2 more poems. This next to last poem, I feel the need to bring the wolves in a more collective way, I guess, and let you know what they're doing in this book, because you've seen very few wolves, mostly that one she-wolf. So this gives you a broader idea. And this poem, I actually have to give a shout out to Kestrel, Journal of Literature, they have a reading coming at 3, I believe, and they published this poem. And it was important to the collection because it was written early in the evolution of the book and kind of helped me figure out what was happening. And I am so thankful to Elizabeth Savage and Donna Long, the editors of Kestrel, for encouraging that work. This poem's in 2 parts, and it's called If a Wolf, and it begins with an epigraph from Charles Perrault, who's the fairy tale folklorist who in French in the late early 1700s translated fairy tales. And this is from his translation of Little Red Cap. he's talking about the big bad wolf. And he says, quote, "I say a wolf, but not all wolves are exactly the same." If a wolf. 1. I say a wolf, but I mean the moss dog, old gray braid, curled on frayed leaves, deep in the winter wood. Not the beast your mother made, who scans hood and bed, tells itself, "You'll get them both." I mean ghost and lone, whose eyelids drag under her sleep, whose dreams sew girl to crone, knowing that in your warm seams you are both a piece, embroidered one. I say wolf, but I mean gown of changed night, forecast of bones falling from the rook's tongues, the weight of 100 skies inside. 2. But what if feathers scrape your frozen coat and a wolf is nothing but weather breaking? What if I say, softens the voice, not to disguise a snarl, but let the tail warm your skin? Say it's the wood that wants to sharpen rain, eat grandmother's ears and teeth. Say you're the girl who means to throw a spear into the old woman's mouth. What if a wolf says, take this loaf, says, find the pine room empty, a good red stove, a chair, dark in there, but not the dark your mother told? What if a wolf says, throw your dress into the fire, it binds you and the village wants you bound, says, drop the axe, drop the spear? What if you give them back their cakes and wine, their predator, pet, darling, their dear? And what if a wolf is telling this story, her mouth wide, not to bite, but hold it out to you on a rug of snow? And it is safe to lie down just now. You've both walked so far. Lie down and listen to the story and the breath in the rain's gray fur, sunlight of wild grief. So the last poem I'm going to read is a final poem for my mother. And so many of the poems are in the way that they're folklore-esque about stories and storytelling. And this is another way of retelling a story, the way fairy tales are often told, a story of a relationship. It's called When You Call My Body an Odd Thing. Once I was the sonnet inside you, fetal, compressed. Remember our thirst? And what you wanted, garnet words turning in their beds. This was back when you held weather before you felt it break. Back before the fathers and their pills, the winds that shrilled and shrank us. Sorry, you almost wrote, rhyming worry into my heart's code. Once I was the umbrella. Inside you, the dead sent rain. I know now I was something held, your little shadow, little shade. I opened to catch a bright stigma of stars that fell across dark fields. Then our hurts became finger-painted roses, sealed, full-blown and folded flat, unpeeling into wet, mirrored blooms. Now you can't hold me anymore. You see the sky, strange and heavy. You hand me your lipstick, your purse, hard things that shine night black and away. You look into them and see your body, your body. Mother, if you don't know me now, don't you know the stone I was inside you? Can't you make room for the ring beneath your tongue? Just open your hand a minute, hold it. You don't have to call it blue or beautiful. You don't have to keep it warm. Thank you.
So Sally, I posted this on social media earlier in the week, but I had read to my students, didn't assign it, just read to my students Crown, because I wanted them to have that gorgeous, gorgeous language. And as I was reading it to kind of get ready to read it aloud, I remarked that all of the hairs on my arms stood up. And just hearing you read that again just had all of the hairs, right? All my mammal, right? Just poke out.
That's great. Thank you.
and Elizabeth Savage remarked in the chat, I won't do it justice. Damn.
Thank you, Elizabeth Savage. I can hear Elizabeth saying that. That's great. Thanks.
She also remarks, what a perfect reading.
Well, that poem was very hard to write. And what, in terms of the craft of it, one of the challenges was, you've got a lot of repetition going, and I want it to kind of increase in momentum, obviously, that tension, how to capture the tension of parenting in 2016 in a poem, I don't know. And so I was hoping to do that, but there's a point at which you worry that it's going to get actually tedious, like exhausting. And then I thought, well, maybe exhaustion's also part of it. Maybe that's okay. But there was a way in which I kept trying to pare it down so it didn't oversell, but but also stay true to kind of the tension in it. And it's so hard to write about being a mother. I mean, I've been warned against it in so many ways, by so many teachers and mentors, but I can't not do it. So here we are. So I'm glad that that you had that experience from the poem, because there's always a fear, that I've just kind of, I've oversold it in some way, or my own intensity, that I haven't managed to capture that on the page.
So this is related. Donna Long asks the question, actually questions. Do your sons write and or read your work? And big question, do you choose an overarching image or theme like the wolf, or does it choose you? When do you know you have a book manuscript? So she's a correction. I mean, do your sons write themselves? And do they read your work?
Okay, well, question one, Donna. They do not write. They're not super interested in reading my work, but occasionally they get interested. There was a moment when my older son was interested, and I read him the horse poem. And I think he appreciated that. He remembers that horse. And so we had a moment there. They're only occasionally interested in what I'm writing. They are welcome to read it. It is made available to them. My younger son actually did some creative writing when he was smaller, and also drawing. He is more of a visual artist. So that addresses that. I do welcome them to read what I write. And I do have an awareness of them as a potential audience, even though they're not, chomping at the bit to see the next thing I've written. I'm always right with the idea in mind that they may at some point want to read it. So that, hopefully that addresses that. And then the wolf. Well, what happened with this collection was, does the wolf choose you, and when do you know a manuscript is done, are the same question for me with this book. So I'm glad she asked. What happened with this collection in 2012, 2013, I started writing these fairy tale poems, and they were really about girls in trouble, bad things that happened to girls and women. Fairy tales sort of presented themselves to me, I think, because they're the first stories I heard about dangers to a girl's body. Little Red Riding Hood, this could happen. And so they're primal in that way. And also I love fairy tales, and I love kind of magical realism. But I thought I was writing this one collection, and I got to about 2016, and I thought it was done. And it was using fairy tales and even persona poems from the point of view of Sleeping Beauty and Gretel. There were a lot of Gretel poems. So I thought I had this manuscript ready to go, and I sent it out to some people, and they sent it back, and they treated it too like it was sort of this about to happen thing. And then I thought, this is not what this book is actually about, and I don't know yet what it's about. I ended up pulling out the persona poems. They were kind of in the center of the book, and they became a chapbook, which is called Says the Forest to the girl. And then I had this weird manuscript with a hole in it. And I knew there was something, but I didn't know what. And the wolves they did choose me. I was writing poems that had sort of bits of fairy tale in them, but like was exploring parenting and my relationship with my mother. And I wrote the poem First Night, and that wolf came into the yard. And that's a poem I've been writing for many years. I kept trying to write the poem about the night my parents separated, and it never worked. It never went anywhere. I never submitted, and it was never finished. It was always a different angle. And I wrote that poem. I was like, here I am writing this poem again. I don't even know why I'm doing it in 2017. But the wolf, who had been in these other poems, showed up. And that was what turned me in the direction. I felt like I let a bunch of wolves in at that point. I opened the door, the wolves were at the door, and I do feel like it chose me. But it chose me after about 4 years of thinking I knew what I was doing with the wolf. It was part of this larger cast of characters, and then this thing happened. So then I was writing this. I had been saying I had this book almost ready, and I had to just hit reverse and say, no, I'm writing a different book. And by 2020, that was in shape. And it felt bad to have to kind of change. I didn't want to change directions. I wanted to be done with the manuscript, but suddenly it was clear that it was I couldn't say no to it. So it really was organic, Dawn. I had no choice. I was ready to hang up the fairy tales, and then it just kept. So I wrote 20 new poems that ended up in this collection, and, took out about the same number to reshape it.
Related to the wolves, Elizabeth Savage asks, you gave Perot a shout out. Was Angela Carter also significant to your, this is an amazing word, was Angela Carter also significant to your wolving?
Oh, I love it. I mean, yes. I mean, The Bloody Chamber in 2012 or so, when I was writing about fairy tales, I returned to Angela Carter, who, of course, I had become acquainted with in, I guess it's Nights at the Circus, years earlier in the 90s when Elizabeth and I first knew each other. And absolutely, The Bloody Chamber was really a kind of beacon of what you can do with fairy tale retellings. Yes, she's a light. And I continue, even though this book is done, I can't stop with the fairy tale retellings. I love reading them, and I'm so interested in what people are doing. Recently, I read Kissing the Witch by Emma, is it Donahue, I believe. So there've been so it hasn't stopped. I'm still reading this stuff, but certainly Angela Carter was influential, as was Anne Sexton's Transformations. Louise Gluck's poem Gretel in Darkness. I mean, I could go on, but one of the best things about writing these poems was then I had permission to do research, and I've just loved it. I just fell in love with what women writers have done in the last, 30 years with folklore. It's just so much great work.
Elizabeth also writes, this is very encouraging to hear. Thank you. I've been backing and forthing on a manuscript that's not right, despite what readers have said, but I don't know why. Now I have hope I'll figure it out.
Yeah, if it takes you 5 years, don't worry about it. That's I actually thought I was getting better at writing books. This is the third one, and it's taken the longest of all of them, and it's the only one that took this huge U-turn. But I like to think that in some way I am getting better, because maybe I'm listening more carefully. Like, it maybe those other two books had things in them I wasn't attending to the way I am with this. So I fully expect the next book to take, twice as long as this one. But I do not fear, Elizabeth, if your gut is telling you that your book has a new direction to take, even if it feels like it's in an advanced stage. I'm now somebody who is I feel like that's worth listening to. So, yeah.
And I thank you for those rewarding answers. So what about so you extracted that middle portion of the persona poems, right? To put into Says the Forest to the Girl, which is also a just fantastic collection. But the kind of presence of those early danger stories, right? Bodily dangers to women stories. Do you have any resistance to kind of sidling up to those, recognizing ways in which they might have informed your own thinking about danger?
Oh, I think that was crucial to both collections. While those persona poems ended up in the chapbook, I would say they were actually the first step to another sort of cluster of poems in this collection, which are these self-portrait poems, self-portrait at 19, self-portrait at 21, which also bring in fabulism and this sort of apocalyptic folkloric imagery, folkloresque, yes. So that these are, I didn't read from those today, but they could not have been written. It's all like in stages. They could not have been written if I hadn't written the persona poems first, allowed me to kind of try out the voice of Sleeping Beauty and Little Red, these people who had experienced this kind of, these kinds of outward, otherworldly threats to the body, which is a great metaphor for just, puberty and so much else that women go through being in bodies in our culture. And I feel like I got to try it out. It was almost like sort of not to put down the persona poems, but there was some play acting that went on there that allowed for some, I don't know, insights into my own experience. And then I was able to get closer with these self-portrait poems in the book. And it was scary. It was hard to sidle up to. And it took the persona poems in many ways to get me closer in. And I think that's part of what the turn was in the book, was that I realized the book needed to be more personal and more immediate. And I couldn't just stay in the realm of the persona. And so I needed to get in deeper into mixing what those elements of fabulism are doing with lived experience, I guess. And that's always feels risky, the same way, like writing Crown, it's like in some ways it's a political poem. And there's the whole question of positioning yourself. You don't want to appropriate somebody's experience. You want to like sort of reflect their integrity. And it's just very tricky when it's so close in. I always feel more comfortable writing about things that happened 20 years ago. So, and the body is also like that. It's immediate, it's right here. And so some of us need ways in, and I think that those persona poems were a way in for me.
Yeah, thank you for that. Donna asks, how does teaching creative writing to real youngsters help or hinder your writing, if at all?
Help do what?
Help or hinder your writing, if at all.
Oh, I think it helps. I think that having to talk about craft to people who are, will read up. I am fortunate, like with CTY, I'm teaching these kids who are very interested in writing. They want to be writers, and they're often emotionally affected by what they've read. And they're not there to get some of them may be there to get some kind of credit or a grade, but many of them do it just as an extracurricular. So they really have a personal investment in it. And what's great about them is they come in and they can read something and have an experience, but they don't yet necessarily have the vocabulary for how the poem got there. And if you're forced to explain it, you can't take anything for granted. I feel like it always gives me a much more, I don't know if it's clearer, but more to have to account for the effects that a line break creates, the tonal and thematic effects that a metaphor creates. Keeps me from sort of being lazy as a writer. It forces me to be more rigorous with my own work. If when I sit down to write, I have the same questions in my head, like what if not, maybe when I'm drafting, when it's all kind of spilling out, but when I'm revising, I'm accountable to that teacher voice that, and those student questions, like what is that line doing? We don't just sort of take it for granted. Everybody must understand that. And so for me, I'm always educating myself when I have to explain stuff like that. I guess it's very helpful.
That's just such a fascinating, but also immediately recognizable answer, right? Of how the ways in which having to talk through a work clarifies what really is happening and clarifies the way that you think about the work in the future is just fascinating. Nina Forsyth asks, did you grow up with a lot of fairy tales? It seems that the poems are soaked in them in such a rooted way. I feel that research into mythology gives one a different perspective.
Oh yes, I definitely grew up with them, and I actually gave a presentation at an Indie Lit, I think in 2016, about fairy tales. I was, been working on this for a while, where I talked about the fact that um, not only are they for me, as they are for many people, the first like Grimm tales for many people in the United States are the first stories we hear. And I fell in love with story from that very small age. So they remind me of kind of that primal initial passion for narrative as a way of understanding the world. Um, but I do remember I particularly identified with Little Red, and that way that these sort of these stories that have come across down through generations and across from Germany and everything else and become personal. I so personalized that narrative. There were woods in the backyard running all the way up, for acres in our behind our house, and I always heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood as taking place in those woods. I can't picture that story. And I realized it when I was sitting down to read the fairy tales to my children, and then it returned to me. My images, whatever the picture is in the book, is of our woods on Tallwood Drive in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's where the wolf was. And the fact that, it was still there and that personalized to me when I was reading it to my children made me realize, how powerful it is. So yes, research does change things. But I still picture, and when I write these, I still picture those woods, which in some ways made it easier to bring that wolf into my backyard in that poem. So yeah. But it's been thrilling. I've been reading more fairy tales from other cultures lately, like across cultures, and the Anansi spider stories, and Goldflower and the Bear, which is a Chinese revisioning of Little Red, and that's also thrilling to see those threads, how children all over the world are hearing these stories, and the fabulous and the elements of magic can have that kind of emotional impact. And knowing that the readers are invested when you start using folklore because they bring to it their own woods. That's a wonderful thing about being able to use those elements in poetry.
And you're placing the wolf in your own woods means that you've been working on this book for even longer than you realize.
Yeah, maybe since I was 3. So,
Right. That's why it works so well. So we're probably butting up against time. And Sally, thank you so much for this reading. And your talk about fairy tales in 2016 was my first Indie Lit in this role.
Wow, okay.
So I feel even more kind of connected to some of these poems now, but and just ever more grateful for your writing and your work and what you do and your voice. So thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful, and I'm looking forward to the next couple readings. So thanks a lot.